Arthur Sterling sat in the plush leather seat of his private Gulfstream, staring out at the clouds, but his mind was thousands of miles ahead of the jet's engines. To the rest of the world, Arthur was a titan of the logistics industry, a man whose name was synonymous with efficiency, cold logic, and a net worth that had more zeros than most people could wrap their heads around. He was the man who had streamlined global shipping routes, the man who never missed a deadline, and the man who was currently breaking his own golden rule. He was leaving a multi-billion-dollar deal in Dubai before the ink was even dry. His assistant, a sharp-dressed man named David, hovered near the galley with a look of suppressed anxiety. "Sir, the Alpha Day Group is still expecting you for the closing dinner. They might take your early departure as a sign of disrespect." Arthur didn't turn his head. He watched the sunlight glint off the wing. "The deal is done, David. They got what they wanted, and I got what I wanted. But today is my daughter's 16th birthday. I've missed the last 3. I won't miss this one." For Arthur, the decision was a rare moment of sentimentality over strategy. His daughter, Chloe, was the only person left in his life who didn't look at him and see a walking bank account. Since his wife had passed away 5 years ago, the distance between him and Chloe had grown, not because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of time. He lived in the office. She lived in the cavernous silence of their Greenwich estate. Today was supposed to be the start of fixing that. The flight landed at Teterboro Airport 4 hours ahead of schedule. Arthur opted to drive himself, a rare indulgence. He wanted the feeling of the steering wheel in his hands, the sense of control as he wound his way through the lush wooded roads of Connecticut. He pictured the look on Chloe's face when he walked through the front door at 2 p.m. instead of midnight. He had a gift in the glove box, a vintage locket that had belonged to her mother, and a plan to take her to whatever restaurant she chose, even if it was just a local burger joint. As he turned onto the long, winding driveway of his estate, the first flicker of unease touched his chest. The massive wrought iron gates, which were usually synced to a precise timer and security protocol, were standing wide open, not just unlatched. It swung back as if someone had left in a hurry or forgotten they existed entirely. Arthur slowed the car, his eyes narrowing. He pulled up to the main house, a sprawling masterpiece of stone and glass that usually looked like a fortress of solitude. Today, it felt different. The silence of the woods seemed too heavy. He stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching loudly under his expensive loafers. He didn't call out. It was a habit from his business dealings: observe first, speak later. He approached the heavy oak front door and reached for his keys, but he didn't need them. The door was slightly ajar, resting against the frame but not clicked shut. A man like Arthur didn't immediately think of ghosts or monsters. He thought of security breaches. He thought of the high-tech alarm system he'd paid $500,000 for. He looked at the keypad just inside the door. The small LED light was glowing green, indicating the system was disarmed. That was impossible. Chloe knew the code, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, knew the code. But Mrs. Higgins was off on Thursdays. He stepped into the foyer. The air inside was cool, smelling of the expensive lilies that were delivered every Tuesday. But as he looked down at the polished marble floor, he saw something that stopped him cold. Next to the mahogany umbrella stand, where Chloe usually tossed her designer sneakers, sat a pair of boots. They were old, heavy-duty work boots, the kind construction workers or hikers might wear. They were caked in dried reddish mud that was flaking off onto the pristine white floor. They were far too small to belong to a grown man. But they were rugged and worn in a way that nothing Chloe owned ever was. Arthur felt a pulse of adrenaline. "Chloe," he called out. His voice echoed up the grand staircase, bouncing off the high ceilings. No answer. He moved deeper into the house, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. He headed toward the kitchen, thinking maybe she was just wearing strange shoes for a school project, but the kitchen revealed more glitches. On the marble island sat 2 plates. They weren't tucked away in the dishwasher as per the house rules. There were crusts of grilled cheese sandwiches and 2 half-empty glasses of orange juice. Arthur touched the side of one of the glasses. It was still cold. Someone had been sitting here less than 20 minutes ago. He knew Chloe's schedule. She should have been at her private tutoring session across town. He pulled out his phone to call her, But then he heard a faint, muffled thud from the floor above him. It came from the direction of Chloe's bedroom suite. He climbed the stairs, his heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. He reached the landing and turned toward his daughter's wing. The door to her room was closed. Usually, she kept it open when she was home alone. As he got closer, he heard voices. Chloe was speaking. She sounded hushed, her tone intense and urgent. "You have to stay quiet," he heard her whisper. "If he finds out, everything is over. I'll bring more water in a minute, just don't move." Arthur froze. His mind raced through a dozen scenarios, most of them involving Chloe being in some kind of trouble or being manipulated. Was she hiding a boyfriend? That was the most logical explanation for a 16-year-old. But the muddy boots downstairs didn't look like teenage fashion. The tone of her voice wasn't romantic. It was terrified. He reached for the gold-plated handle of her door and turned it. It was locked from the inside. This was a new development. They didn't lock doors in this house. There was no need for it when you lived behind a guarded gate. Chloe. "It's Dad. Open the door," he said, trying to keep his voice level and commanding. The silence that followed was deafening. He heard a sharp intake of breath, the sound of something heavy being dragged across a carpet, and then nothing. "Chloe, I know you're in there. I came home early for your birthday. Open the door right now." Nearly a full minute passed before the lock clicked. The door creaked open just a few inches. Chloe stood there, but she didn't look like the daughter he had seen 2 weeks ago. She was wearing an oversized, baggy sweatshirt, despite the house being kept at a steady 70 degrees. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were wide, darting toward the space behind her before settling on his face. "Dad?" she said, her voice trembling. You're not supposed to be here." "I wanted to surprise you," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the narrow gap of the room he could see. "Why is the gate open? And whose boots are in the foyer?" Chloe stepped further into the doorway, physically blocking his entrance. She tried to force a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, the gates? The motor was acting weird, I think. And the boots. They're just for a drama club thing. We're doing a play about, coal miners." Arthur was a man who spotted lies in boardrooms for a living. He saw the way her fingers were twitching against the doorframe. He saw the way she kept glancing back toward her walk-in closet. "A drama club project," Arthur repeated slowly. "In the middle of the foyer. And who were you talking to just now, Chloe?" "I heard you. I was rehearsing my lines," she said quickly. "Too quickly. I have a lot of dialogue. Look, Dad, I'm really tired. Can we just talk at dinner? Give me an hour to nap." Arthur looked at his daughter. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to walk away and pretend everything was normal. But then he looked down at the floor behind her. There, on the pale gray carpet of her bedroom, was a single drop of something dark. It wasn't juice. It wasn't paint. It was a drop of fresh blood. Arthur's paternal instinct clashed with his corporate coldness. He didn't push past her, not yet. He realized that if he forced his way in, he might break whatever fragile trust was left between them. But as he backed away, promising to give her some space, he knew one thing for certain. His daughter wasn't just hiding a secret. She was hiding a person. And that person was bleeding in his house. He walked back down the stairs, but he didn't go to the living room. He went straight to his private study and locked the door. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop, pulling up the feed for the internal security cameras. He began to rewind the footage from the last 3 hours, his hands steady, but his heart cold. As the video skipped backward, he saw Chloe entering the house earlier that morning. But she wasn't alone. She was half carrying, half dragging a smaller figure wrapped in a tattered flannel shirt. The person was limping heavily, and Chloe was looking over her shoulder at the open gate with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Arthur leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. The billionaire was home. The mystery had begun. And the strange thing he had noticed was only the tip of an iceberg that threatened to sink the quiet life he had built for his daughter. Arthur sat in his darkened study, the only light coming from the glowing monitors of his security desk. He felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. In the business world, he was known for being ahead of every move. He could predict market crashes and competitor takeovers months in advance. But here, in his own home, he felt like a stranger walking through a thick fog. He watched the grainy footage on the screen again. He watched his daughter, a girl who usually worried about her grades and her piano lessons, acting with a level of grit and desperation he had never seen before. He zoomed in on the figure she was helping. It was a girl, much smaller than his daughter, maybe 12 or 13 years old. Her face was hidden by a mop of tangled hair, and she was clutching her side. Chloe was whispering to her, leaning her own shoulder into the girl's arm to keep her upright. They didn't go through the main kitchen entrance. They had used the side mudroom, the one usually reserved for the gardener. Arthur leaned back, rubbing his temples. He could feel a headache forming behind his eyes. His first instinct, the one that had made him a billionaire, was to call his head of security, a man who could make any problem disappear with a few phone calls. But something stopped him. He remembered the look in Chloe's eyes when she stood in her bedroom doorway. It wasn't just fear. It was a plea. If he brought in the professionals, he knew exactly what would happen. They would call the police, the girl would be taken away, and Chloe would never forgive him. She would see him as the cold, calculating machine the newspapers often described him as. He decided to play a different game. He would be a father first, but a detective second. He needed to know who was in his house without triggering Chloe's flight response. He stood up and walked out of the study, making sure to step loudly this time. He wanted her to hear him. He went back to the kitchen and started making a show of being a normal dad. He opened the fridge, pulled out some leftovers, and clattered the silverware. He was listening with every fiber of his being. Upstairs, he heard a door creak, then silence. Then the sound of footsteps, light, hurried ones. He waited. 5 minutes later, Chloe appeared at the top of the stairs. She had changed her clothes. She was now wearing a clean t-shirt, but she was still fidgety. She walked down the stairs slowly, watching him like a prey animal watches a predator. "Hey," she said, her voice sounding forced. "I thought you were taking a nap, Dad." "I couldn't sleep," Arthur said, turning around with a smile that he hoped looked natural. "Too much caffeine in Dubai, I think. I was thinking about dinner. I know you like that Italian place downtown, but I thought maybe we could just stay in. I could grill something, like we used to." Chloe reached the bottom step and stopped. She didn't come into the kitchen. She stayed in the hallway, near the exit. "I'm not really hungry, Dad. I had a big lunch." "Remember the plates you saw?" "Right. The grilled cheese," Arthur said. He leaned against the counter. "Who was your friend, by the way?" "The one who likes muddy boots?" Chloe's face went pale. She tucked a strand of hair behind her Aratel she'd had since she was 5 years old. "Oh, that was just a girl from school, Jordan. She's in the hiking club." She dropped off some notes and left. "Through the mudroom?" Arthur asked mildly. Chloe blinked. "Yeah, the front door was stuck. You know how it gets with the humidity," was a good lie. It was a smart lie, but Arthur knew the front door wasn't stuck. He had walked through it 20 minutes ago. He realized then that his daughter was much better at this than he had given her credit for. She was playing his own game of chess. "Well," Arthur said, turning back to the fridge to hide his expression, "if Jordan comes back, tell her she's welcome to stay for cake. It is your birthday, after all." "She won't be back," Chloe said quickly. "She's out of town now. Look, Dad, I really have some homework to finish. Can we just do the cake later tonight? Like at 10? "Sure, honey. 10 o'clock. Chloe turned and practically ran back up the stairs. Arthur waited until he heard her bedroom door click shut. He didn't go back to his study. Instead, he went to the mudroom. He knelt on the floor and looked at the muddy boots. They were cheap, the kind sold at big-box retail stores. They were worn down at the heels, suggesting the wearer had walked miles in them. He picked one up and turned it over. Stuck in the tread was a small, bright blue plastic shard. It looked like a piece of a toy or a specific type of industrial tag. He tucked the shard into his pocket. Then he looked at the floor. There were faint, watery red stains leading away from the mudroom and toward the back stairs. The service stairs led to the guest wing. Arthur realized he had been looking in the wrong place. Chloe's bedroom was a distraction. She wanted him to think she was hiding someone there because she knew he would eventually respect her privacy enough to stay out. But the guest wing was a different story. It was a maze of 5 bedrooms that were rarely used. He moved silently now, his heart rate steadying as he went into problem-solving mode. He bypassed the main staircase and took the narrow service stairs. The air here felt cooler, less lived in. He reached the second-floor landing of the guest wing. Every door was closed. He stood in the center of the hallway and closed his eyes, holding his breath. He heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound. It wasn't talking. It was the sound of a faucet running. Someone was in the guest bathroom at the end of the hall. He walked toward it, his hand reaching for the knob. But then he stopped. If he opened that door and found a bleeding child, what would he do? He was a man of logic, but he wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a social worker. He was a man who owned ships and warehouses. Suddenly, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a text from his security team. "Sir, we've detected a breach on the perimeter fence. Sector 4. It looks like someone cut the wire from the outside. Should we dispatch the local police or handle it internally?" Arthur looked at the bathroom door, then at his phone. The pieces started to click. Someone wasn't just in his house. Someone was looking for the person in his house. The muddy boots, the blood, the cut fence. This wasn't a school project. This was a hunt. He typed back a quick message. "Do not call the police. Stay at the perimeter. Secure the hole, but do not enter the woods. I will handle this." He knew he was taking a risk. If there were intruders on his property, he should be calling for help. But he looked at the bathroom door again and saw a small shadow move underneath the gap. He realized that if the hunters were at the fence and the girl was in the bathroom, then Chloe was the only thing standing between. Then he realized he had to find out what was on the other side of that door before the people at the fence found their way to the house. He reached out and knocked softly on the bathroom door. "Chloe?" he whispered. "I know she's in there." The water stopped running instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the kind of tension that felt like it might snap the floorboards. A voice came from inside. It wasn't Chloe's. It was a younger voice, thin and trembling, cracked with exhaustion. "Please," the voice said. "Don't let them take me back. I'll go away. I'll leave right now. Just don't let them." Arthur felt a pang in his chest he hadn't felt in years. It was a raw, human emotion that bypassed his bank accounts and his business logic. He wasn't a billionaire in that moment. He was just a man in a quiet hallway, listening to a terrified child. "I'm not going to let anyone take you," Arthur said, his voice deep and steady. "I'm the owner of this house. My daughter brought you here, didn't she?" There was a long pause. Then the lock turned. The door opened just a crack. A single dark eye peered out at him. The girl looked like she had been through a war. Her face was smudged with dirt. Her arm was wrapped in one of Chloe's expensive silk scarves, now ruined by a dark, soaking red stain. "She said you were a king," the girl whispered. "She said you have a fortress and that nobody can get past your walls." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. Chloe had told this girl that he was a king. Not a cold businessman, not an absent father, but a protector. He had spent so many years building a financial empire that he hadn't realized his daughter still saw him as a hero. He couldn't let that vision die. "I have the walls," Arthur said, stepping closer, "and I have the power to keep you safe. But you have to tell me who is at my fence. Who is looking for you?" The girl's eyes went wide with terror. She started to shake. "The men with the blue badges," she whispered. "They say they're the law, but they aren't. They're the ones who hurt us at the home. They're coming for the tag." Arthur remembered the blue plastic shard in his pocket. He pulled it out and showed it to her. "This tag?" The girl gasped and pulled back. "That's from my ankle. I cut it off. They use it to find us. If you have that, they're already here." As if on cue, the house's silent alarm system didn't go off. But Arthur's phone chimed again. A new message. "Sir, black SUV at the front gate. To men. They're claiming to be state-authorized recovery agents." They say they're looking for a runaway who might have jumped the fence. They're asking to come inside." Arthur looked at the girl, then down the hallway. He saw Chloe standing at the other end, her face wet with tears. She had been watching the whole time. "Dad," she sobbed, "please. They're going to hurt her. I couldn't just leave her in the woods." Arthur stood up straight. The coldness returned to his eyes, but this time it wasn't directed at his daughter. It was directed at the men at his gate. He realized that being a billionaire gave him a very specific kind of power, the power to be an immovable object. "Chloe," Arthur said, his voice echoing with authority, "take her to my study. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me, not even if you hear a noise. Do you understand?" Chloe nodded, her eyes wide. She grabbed the girl's hand and led her toward the hidden stairs. Arthur watched them go, then he straightened his silk tie and smoothed his hair. He walked down the grand staircase, his footsteps echoing like a drumbeat. He reached the front door and opened it wide, stepping out onto the porch just as the black SUV pulled up to the front steps. Two men stepped out. They were wearing tactical vests and belts loaded with gear. They didn't look like police. They looked like hunters. "Can I help you?" Arthur asked, his voice like ice. "Mr. Sterling?" the lead man asked, checking a tablet. "We're with the Regional Youth Security Initiative. We're tracking a higher-risk runaway. Our sensors picked up her tag on your property." Arthur didn't blink. He didn't look at the SUV. He looked directly into the man's eyes. "You're trespassing on private property," Arthur said. "And as for your sensors, they must be broken. There's no one here but me and my daughter." The man smiled, but it was a cold, empty expression. "Sir, we have a legal warrant to recover the ward. If you're harboring her, that's a federal offense. We'd like to take a look around." Arthur took a single step forward, closing the distance between him and the man. He was shorter than the guard, but in that moment, he felt 10 feet tall. "You want to look around?" Arthur asked softly. "My legal team is already on a conference call with the governor's office. My security team is currently recording your license plate and your faces. If you take one more step toward my door without a signed warrant from a judge I haven't played golf with, I will spend the next 10 years making sure you never work as a mall security guard, let alone a recovery agent." The man hesitated. He looked at his partner. They weren't used to people talking back, especially not people with the resources to actually follow through on a threat. "We just want the girl, Sterling," the man said, his voice losing its edge. "She's a ward of the state." "She's troubled. She's a guest in my home," Arthur replied. "And you are leaving." Now, he watched them for a long minute. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Finally, the men turned and climbed back into their SUV. They didn't drive away immediately. They sat at the end of the driveway, watching the house. Arthur turned and went back inside. Locking the heavy oak door behind him, he didn't feel like a winner. He knew this was only the beginning. The strange thing in his house wasn't just a girl. It was a window into a world he had ignored for too long. He went to his study and knocked on the door. "It's me," he said. The door opened and Chloe threw her arms around him. For the first time in years, she wasn't the distant teenager. She was his little girl. "Are they gone?" she asked. "For now," Arthur said. He looked over her shoulder at the small girl sitting in his expensive leather chair, looking lost among the books and the trophies. "But we have work to do. We need to find out why they're so desperate to get her back. And we need to fix that arm." He looked at his daughter and realized that his birthday gift to her wasn't going to be a locket. It was going to be the truth. And maybe for the first time, he was going to use his billions to build something that couldn't be bought or sold. Arthur sat at his desk. But he wasn't looking at the stock market tickers, or the global logistics maps that usually occupied his 3-monitor setup. Instead, he was watching the two young people in front of him. His daughter sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, holding a glass of water for the smaller girl, who was now wrapped in a thick, oversized cashmere sweater that Arthur recognized as one of his own. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Arthur felt the weight of his world shifting. For years, he had operated in a reality where every problem had a price tag and every person had a role. But as he looked at the girl whose name he had just learned was Lily, he realized his wealth had no power here. Lily wasn't a business rival or a disgruntled employee. She was a child who looked like she had been hunted through the woods like an animal. "Chloe," Arthur said, his voice softer than it had been in years, "I need you to go to the kitchen. Get the first aid kit, the big one, from the pantry, and some clean towels." "Can you do that?" Chloe looked at him, her eyes searching his for any sign that he was going to call the men in the SUV the moment she left the room. She saw something in his expression that calmed her. She nodded, squeezed Lily's hand, and slipped out of the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, Arthur turned his chair toward Lily. He didn't stand up. He didn't want to look bigger than he already was. "Lily," he said quietly, "I told those men they couldn't come in, and I meant it. But I need you to understand something. My house is very safe, but it is not a secret. Those men know you are here. If I am going to keep you safe, I need to know why they want you so badly. It isn't just because you ran away, is it?" Lily pulled the sleeves of the sweater over her hands. She looked at the floor, her shoulders shaking. "It's the documents," she whispered. Arthur leaned forward. "What documents?" "At the home," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not a school. It's like a place where they keep kids until they can find a use for them. My brother was there too. He found out that the people who run the home were taking money from the government for kids who weren't even there anymore. And some of the kids, they just disappeared." Arthur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. He had heard rumors of corruption in the private foster care systems, but he had always viewed it as a distant political problem. To hear it from a child who had seen it firsthand made it real in a way that turned his stomach. "My brother gave me a thumb drive," Lily continued, finally looking up. Her eyes were red but fierce. "He told me to run if anything happened to him. He went into the office one night and never came back out. I waited 2 days. Then I climbed the fence. I've been running for 3 days. I was trying to find a library to send the files to a newspaper, but the men with the blue badges found me. I hid in the woods behind your house. That's where she found me." She pointed toward the door where Chloe had exited. Arthur realized then that his daughter hadn't just found a stray. She had found a witness to a crime. Chloe returned with the first aid kit. She sat down next to Lily and began to carefully unwind the silk scarf from the girl's arm. Arthur watched as the deep gash was revealed. It wasn't from a knife. It was a jagged tear from the barbed wire on his own perimeter fence. He felt a wave of guilt. He had installed that fence to keep the world out, never imagining it would hurt someone trying to get in. As Chloe cleaned the wound, Arthur pulled his laptop toward him. "Lily, do you still have the drive?" Lily reached into the pocket of her jeans, the ones Chloe had given her to replace her muddy clothes, and pulled out a small, battered silver USB stick. It was scratched and covered in dirt, but it looked intact. Arthur took it with a sense of gravity. He plugged it into a secure, air-gapped laptop, one not connected to his main business servers. He didn't want whatever was on this drive to infect his company, or worse, be tracked by whoever was looking for Lily. He spent the next hour in total silence, scrolling through spreadsheets, scanned contracts, and internal emails. His face grew harder with every page. He saw names he recognized: local politicians, wealthy donors who sat on charity boards, and high-ranking officials in the state's child welfare department. It was a massive embezzlement scheme disguised as a non-profit organization. They were skimming millions, and the missing children were being moved to unlicensed facilities to keep the paper trail messy. "Dad!" Chloe's voice broke his concentration. She had finished bandaging Lily's arm. Lily had fallen asleep against the sofa cushions, exhausted by the trauma and the physical pain. "Is it bad?" Arthur looked at his daughter. He realized that the strange thing he had noticed earlier at the boots, the locked door, was the bravest thing he had ever seen. "It's worse than bad, Chloe. It's a systemic nightmare. These people have a lot of power. They aren't just going to walk away because I told them to. But you can stop them, right?" Chloe asked. "You're Arthur Sterling. You always win." looked at the sleeping girl, then back at his daughter. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if winning was as simple as writing a check or making a threat. These people were desperate. Desperate people didn't care about legal threats. They cared about survival. "I need to see the digital trail," Arthur said, more to himself than to her. "Those men said they were tracking a tag." Lily said she cut it off. "Where is it?" "I threw it in the woods," Lily murmured, her eyes half opening. "Near the big oak tree by the fence?" Arthur shook his head. "If that tag is still active, they're sitting at the gate waiting for a signal. But if I can access the network that monitors those tags, I can see who is actually paying for the service." He turned back to his computer. This was his world data, logistics, and hidden connections. He began to trace the signal frequency of the Regional Youth Security Initiative. He found that the company didn't technically exist. It was a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. He dug deeper. He bypassed 3 layers of firewalls, using the same aggressive tactics he used to scout competitors. He found the source of the data stream. The tracking software was being hosted on a private server located less than 10 miles from his house. But then, saw something that made his heart stop. The server logs showed a series of pings. The tags were designed to talk to each other. When one tag was near another, they created a mesh network. The log showed that Lily's tag had been active near the fence, but it also showed another active signal, one that was inside the house. Arthur stood up so fast, his chair hit the wall. "Chloe," he whispered, "check your bag. Your school bag. Now." Chloe looked confused, but grabbed her backpack from the corner of the study. She dumped the contents onto the floor. Books, pens, a makeup kit, and a small, decorative keychain she had bought at the mall a week ago, a little blue bear. Arthur picked up the keychain. He felt the weight of it. He squeezed the plastic, and it popped open. Inside was a tiny high-powered GPS transmitter. "They aren't tracking her," Arthur realized, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "They're tracking you." The realization hit like a physical blow. The men at the gate weren't just there for Lily. They had been following Chloe for days, waiting for her to lead them to the girl. Or perhaps they had used Chloe as a way to find out if Lily had reached out to anyone with power. They had let his daughter do their work for them. "I didn't know," Chloe gasped, her face turning white. "Dad, I swear, a lady at the park gave it to me. She said it was a promotion for a new store." "I know, honey." "I know," Arthur said, pulling her into a brief, firm hug. He looked at the keychain, then at the monitors. He saw the black SUV on the front gate camera. It hadn't moved. But then a second SUV pulled up behind it. Then a third. These weren't just recovery agents anymore. It was a small army. Arthur knew he couldn't wait for his lawyers. He couldn't wait for the morning. The something strange he had noticed when he came home was no longer a mystery. It was a full-scale siege. He looked at his daughter and the runaway girl. He saw the fear in their eyes, but he also saw their hope. They believed he could fix this. Arthur Sterling, a man who never took risks he couldn't calculate, picked up his phone and dialed his head of security. "Get the helicopter ready," Arthur commanded, "and tell the ground team to arm the perimeter. We aren't just protecting a house anymore. We're protecting the truth." He looked at the thumb drive on the desk. This small piece of metal was the only thing that could take down the people who were currently at his gates, and he was going to make sure the world saw it, even if he had to burn his own fortress down to do it. Arthur stood by the large floor-to-ceiling window of his study, watching the rain begin to lash against the glass. The weather was turning, matching the storm brewing at his front gates. He could see the faint glow of headlights through the trees at the end of his long driveway. Those SUVs were still there, like wolves circling a campfire waiting for the flames to die down. He felt a strange mixture of anger and clarity. For years, he had lived in a world where everything was a transaction. Now, for the first time, he was facing something that couldn't be bought off or negotiated away. This was about survival, not his own, but the survival of a girl who had no one else. He turned back to the room. Chloe was sitting on the floor next to Lily, trying to make her laugh with a card game, but her hands were shaking. Lily looked like she was drifting in and out of sleep, her face pale. Arthur knew he had to act fast. Those men outside weren't just going to sit there forever. They knew he had the drive, and they knew he was onto them. "Chloe," Arthur said, his voice steady, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. We are going to leave. Not in a car, and not through the front gate." Chloe looked up, her eyes wide. "But Dad, they're everywhere." "How?" "This house was built by a man who valued his privacy more than his life," Arthur explained. "When I bought this estate, I made some upgrades that aren't on any public blueprints. There is a service tunnel that runs from the basement to the old carriage house at the edge of the property. It was built during the Prohibition era, but I've kept it maintained. From there, we can reach the private helipad in the clearing." He saw the fear in Lily's eyes. She had been running for so long that the idea of moving again seemed to paralyze her. Arthur walked over and knelt in front of her. He took her small, cold hand in his. "Lily, I know you're tired. I know you've been through things I can't even imagine. But I am going to get you to a place where those men can never touch you again. I have a friend in the city, a judge, who isn't on any of the lists I saw on that drive. We are going to give him the files, and we are going to end this tonight. Do you trust me?" Lily looked at him for a long time. She saw the billionaire, the man who owned fleets of ships and skyscrapers. But she also saw the father who had just held his daughter's hand. She nodded slowly. "Okay," Arthur said, standing up. "We have 10 minutes. Grab only what you need. No phones. If they are tracking Chloe's bag, they might be tracking yours too. Leave everything electronic here." As the girls scrambled to gather a few essentials, Arthur went to his wall safe. He didn't take gold or jewelry. He took a stack of hard cash and a second backup of the thumb drive. He tucked the drive into his inner coat pocket. He then picked up a small, handheld radio. "Team 1, he whispered into the radio. "Initiate the decoy protocol. Now." Outside, the lights in the main house began to flicker. One by one, the windows went dark, then bright, then dark again, mimicking the patterns of someone moving quickly through the rooms. At the same time, 2 of Arthur's security vehicles parked in the garage started their engines, the roar echoing through the vents to make it sound like a convoy was preparing to break through the front gates. "Let's go," Arthur commanded. He led them down to the basement, past the wine cellar and the gym, to a heavy steel door hidden behind a rack of storage shelves. He punched a code into a hidden keypad and the door hissed open, revealing a narrow, well-lit concrete tunnel. "Stay close to me," he said. The air in the tunnel was cool and smelled of damp earth. They walked in silence, the only sound being the rhythmic thud of their sneakers on the floor. Arthur kept his eyes moving, checking the small tablet he carried that was linked to the tunnel's internal sensors. He was looking for any sign of a breach. As they walked, Chloe pulled alongside him. "Dad," she whispered, "why didn't you just call the police earlier? I mean, real police, not those guys at the gate." Arthur sighed, his breath hitching slightly. "Because, Chloe, the people on that drive, they have friends in high places. If I called the local precinct, I didn't know who would show up at the door. I had to be sure. In business, you never make a move until you know exactly who is sitting across the table from you. Tonight, I finally saw their faces." They reached the end of the tunnel after about 10 minutes of walking. The exit was a small, inconspicuous wooden door that led into the back of an old stone building, the carriage house. It was overgrown with ivy and looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Arthur cracked the door open and peered out. The rain was heavy now, providing a perfect curtain of noise and blurred vision. The carriage house was about 50 yards from the forest clearing where his helicopter was waiting. He could see the pilot already starting the rotors, the low hum masked by the thunder. "When I say run, we run," Arthur said. "Don't look back. Just get to the chopper." He waited for a flash of lightning to fade, then shouted, "Now." They burst out of the carriage house. Arthur held Lily's arm, helping her limp through the wet grass, while Chloe ran just ahead of them. The wind from the helicopter blades was kicking up a spray of water that made it hard to see suddenly. A bright spotlight cut through the darkness from the tree line. "Stop. State agents. Stay where you are. A voice boomed over a megaphone. Arthur didn't stop. He pushed Lily toward the open door of the helicopter where a security guard was reaching out to pull her in. Get in, go. A black SUV tore across the grass from the woods, its tires spinning and throwing mud into the air. It was trying to block the helicopter's path. Arthur turned to face the oncoming vehicle. He stood his ground, a lone figure in a tailored suit, standing in the middle of a muddy field. He held up his hand, not as a weapon, but as a command. The SUV screeched to a halt just inches from him. The lead man from earlier, the one who had been at the front gate, stepped out of the vehicle. He looked furious, his hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. He pulled a badge from his pocket and held it up. You're obstructing illegal recovery, Sterling. Move aside, or you're going to jail. Arthur didn't flinch. He looked at the man, and for the first time, he felt a sense of pity. This man was a pawn, a small part of a much larger, uglier machine. You're not recovery agents, Arthur said, his voice carrying over the roar of the engines. You're cleaners. You're here to make sure a little girl doesn't. Talk about what's happening at that home, but you're too late. Arthur pulled the second thumb drive from his pocket and held it. Up. This is already being uploaded to a secure cloud server, Arthur lied. Though he knew the man wouldn't know the difference. The moment this helicopter leaves the ground, the data goes live to every major news outlet in the country. You can take me to jail. You can even try to stop that chopper. But you can't stop the information. It's already gone. The man hesitated. He looked at the helicopter, where Chloe was staring out the window with a look of defiance that mirrored her. Fathers. He looked at the drive in Arthur's hand. In that moment of hesitation, Arthur saw the man's power crumble. Like every bully Arthur had ever faced in a boardroom, this man relied on fear, and Arthur Sterling was no longer afraid. Get back in your car, Arthur said, and call your bosses. Tell them the game is over. The man glared at him, but he didn't move forward. He knew he was outmatched. Arthur wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man with nothing left to lose but his daughter's respect, and he had already won that back. Arthur turned his back on the man and climbed into the helicopter. As the doors slid shut and the machine lifted into the air, he looked down at his estate. It looked small from up here. The lights of the SUVs were still flickering in the mud, but they looked like toy cars now. He sat down across from Chloe and Lily. Lily was wrapped in a blanket, her head resting on Chloe's shoulder. Chloe looked at her father, her eyes shining. Are we going to be okay, Dad? She asked. Arthur reached out and took her hand. We're going to do better than okay, Chloe. We're going to make things right. The helicopter turned toward the bright lights of the city skyline. Arthur looked at the thumb drive in his hand. He knew the next few days would be a whirlwind of legal battles, police interviews, and media frenzies. His reputation would be dragged through the mud, and his quiet life would be over. But as he watched Lily finally fall into a deep, safe sleep, he knew it was the best investment he had ever made. He had come home early to surprise his daughter, and in doing so, he had discovered the one thing his money could never buy: a purpose. The helicopter touched down on the roof of a glass skyscraper in the heart of the city, just as the first hint of gray light began to bleed into the morning sky. Arthur stepped out first, his suit jacket ruined by the rain and mud, but his posture more upright than it had been in years. He reached back to help Lily and Chloe out of the cabin. The cold, biting wind of the high altitude whipped around them, but the roof was buzzing with a different kind of energy. Standing there was a small group of people Arthur had called from the air. 2 of the highest-paid civil rights lawyers in the country, and a woman named Mrs. Gable, a retired judge known for her ironclad integrity. Arthur didn't say a word as he led the girls toward the elevator. He didn't need to. The lawyers took one look at Lily, her pale face, the bandage on her arm, and the oversized sweater, and they knew this wasn't a corporate merger. This was a rescue. Once inside the quiet, oak-paneled offices below, the real work began. Arthur sat Lily down in a comfortable chair and made sure she had hot chocolate and a warm blanket. He stayed by her side, not as a boss, but as a silent guard. He watched as Mrs. Gable sat across from the girl, speaking in a voice so soft and kind, it seemed to melt the ice of terror that had frozen Lily for the last few days. Lily began to talk. She told them about the home, the way the doors were locked from the outside, the way troublesome kids were taken to the basement and never seen again, and the way the men in the blue badges were paid to keep everyone quiet. As she spoke, the lawyers began to look through the files on the thumb drive. The room grew colder with every revelation. They found the bank accounts, the shell companies, and the names of people who were supposed to be protecting children but were instead profiting from their disappearance. Arthur listened to it all, his jaw tight. He realized that, for a long time, he had lived in a bubble. He had thought that as long as his own world was safe and his own daughter was fed, the rest of the world's problems were just headlines. Seeing the pain in Lily's eyes changed that forever. He looked at Chloe, who was sitting on the floor by Lily's feet, holding her hand. He realized his daughter had seen the truth long before he had. "What happens now?" Chloe asked, looking up at her father. "Now," Arthur said, "we go on the offensive." He didn't wait for the wheels of justice to turn at their usual slow pace. He used his influence to call a press conference for that very afternoon. He didn't care about the risk to his stock price or his reputation. He wanted the world to see what was happening before the people in the Regional Youth Security Initiative could bury the evidence. By 2 p.m., the lobby of his building was packed with cameras and reporters. Arthur walked out onto the small stage alone. He didn't have a prepared speech written by a PR firm. He just had the truth. He told the story of coming home early for a birthday and finding a stranger in his house. He told them about the chase through the woods and the men at his gate, and then he played a single audio clip from the thumb drive, a recording of a high-ranking official, discussing the cost-benefit of closing down a foster home and moving the kids to an undocumented site. The room went silent. Then it exploded into a frenzy of questions. Arthur didn't answer them. He simply said, "The evidence has been handed over to the Federal Bureau. My home is open to any child who needs a safe place until this is resolved. My bank accounts are open to any legal team willing to fight this system. This isn't a business matter. This is a human matter." The aftermath was a whirlwind. Within 48 hours, the men who had been at Arthur's gate were in custody. Within a week, the home was raided by federal agents, and dozens of children were found and moved to actual hospitals and safe houses. The politicians named in the files began to resign, one by one, their careers crumbling under the weight of the evidence Lily had carried in her pocket. But the real change happened inside the Sterling estate. A month later, the house in Greenwich didn't feel like a fortress anymore. The gates were still there, but they stayed open more often. The silence that used to haunt the hallways was gone, replaced by the sound of music and laughter. Arthur had hired a team of doctors and counselors to help Lily, who was now living in the guest wing not as a secret, but as a permanent guest. Arthur had stepped down as the CEO of his logistics empire. He realized he had enough money to last 10 lifetimes, but he didn't have enough time to waste on things that didn't matter. He started a foundation dedicated to reforming the foster care system, using his knowledge of logistics to track every child in the state's care to ensure no one could ever disappear again. One evening, Arthur was sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. He saw Chloe and Lily in the distance, walking through the garden. They were talking and laughing, Lily looking healthier and stronger every day. Chloe looked back and saw him, waving with a bright, genuine smile. Arthur realized that coming home early that day was the best mistake he had ever made. He had set out to give his daughter a birthday surprise, but she was the one who had given him a gift. She had shown him that his greatest wealth wasn't in his bank account, but in the courage to do what was right when no one was watching. The something strange he had noticed in his house wasn't a threat. It was a wake-up call. It was the moment he stopped being a billionaire and started being a man. And as the stars began to twinkle over the quiet woods of Connecticut, Arthur Sterling finally felt like he was truly home. The story ended not with a victory in a courtroom or a surge in a stock price, but with a simple dinner. For the first time, Arthur, Chloe, and Lily sat at the big mahogany table together. There were no cell phones, No business talk, and no secrets. Just three people, a warm meal, and a future that finally felt bright. Arthur looked at the empty chair where his wife used to sit and felt a sense of peace. He knew she would have been proud of Chloe, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt like he could finally look his daughter in the eye and know that he was exactly the man she thought he was.